If you've ever been curious about what supplements you should be taking and what labs should be ran, if you're over the age of 50, a female, and wanting to improve strength and resiliency, this video is going to be for you. I have Rachel Hicks with me today. She's going to be discussing about those things in detail and what she does with her patients who are female, who are wanting to improve how they feel, how they look, the composition changes, and they're talking about nutrition and diet. Highly debated topics, super fun, but she is on the ground improving these people, improving these women to help them feel better and do more and live longer lives. Then we're going to sprinkle in a little bit of muscle stuff as well, right? Why muscle is important, how do we nourish that muscle through protein intake and supplementation, and then what we need to be doing in especially females to look at resistance training and how that all comes together. So this video is a doozy. I love it. It was an absolute blast. She was amazing, and there's a lot of information to take from it. So enjoy the video and ask any questions that you may have in the comments, but just hang with there. The video is about to start. Well, good morning, Rachel. I appreciate you taking the time today to talk, and I'm really excited about just some of the topics we're covering today, especially after our talk that we recently did. And so I'm not going to waste any more time. I'm going to let you introduce yourself, but we're going to talk today about building strength and resiliency in women over 50, essentially, and how do they do that with movement, and how do you do that with nutrition? And so I know you're a registered dietitian, but I'm not going to take any more thunder from you. Introduce yourself a little bit for us so we can kind of know your background and the people that you work with and why you are a great person for this topic.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks for having me on today. I appreciate it.
Heck
Yeah,
yeah.
this is absolutely a topic that I'm passionate about. Women's health is, I feel like, an underserved discussion right now on the platform of health and wellness. I do own a business called Thrive Wellness. I'm a registered dietitian, but my niche and my specialty is women's health.
Perfect.
And that did not happen until, a decade after clinical work and
Yeah.
realizing that we need to bridge the gap a little bit.
Mhm.
And we'll talk a little bit today of why that's so important and of what, like, why we need to separate the genders a little bit differently, specifically women and specifically women 50 and above. We start to see some pretty like significant health implications
Yeah.
as they start to age. So it
Sure.
will be a fun topic, really necessary topic, and I hope
Yeah.
that listening can take some valuable tips away.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's great. And I think, when people are trying to build their strength and resiliency and they've noticed these changes, what they do, they need some information on, and then what they consume, like how they nourish their body along the way. So kind of explain like, we've got our person in front of us, she's 50 plus years old, starting to develop some aches and pains, but also realizing that her composition has changed. And so, maybe some areas that weren't so soft before are a little softer, and she's lost a little bit of strength. When that person sits down in front of you and she asks you like, hey, what do I need to be putting in my body to kind of match what's changing in my body, what do you say?
Well, I think before we even get to the point of, hey, what are you eating? It's
Okay.
you feeling? What are your symptoms, right? Because I
Okay.
think we talked a lot about in our public discussion that it's not a one size fits all. So
Okay.
yes, I might say you need to eat this and that, but that's not streamlined across the board for every single woman that I'm seeing, right? So
Okay. Okay.
very individual based. So when we sit down, that first conversation is definitely what are you noticing that's changed over the course of your life, and what are some of the
Okay.
reasons it could be changing? So is it that you've gone through menopause? Is it that you've had an injury? Is it that
Okay.
there's been a disease or something that has really expedited this process of quote aging for you? Or
Mhm.
is there another reason that we need to talk? Has your diet changed, or has there been no change over the course of 30 or 40 years?
Got it.
And those are the specific things that we really start to dial down and create some clarity around. So when we start making interventions and assessments within my practice, that they're very specific to the individual needs and that they're targeting the necessities that women need right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you said it, like individualized, and that's key. I mean, when we're both working with people, there isn't typically a one size that fits all because everybody's lives are different, everybody's bodies are different. And so when they have that conversation with you, and let's say their symptoms are just fatigue and not feeling well and not feeling themselves, where do you start then? Like what's your follow-up question?
So, two things. I want to make sure that they are getting regular labs, that we're not
Okay.
looking at something basic as a nutrient deficiency, right?
Okay.
Like if you're feeling fatigue, have we had your iron checked, your ferritin checked, some
Okay.
basic micronutrients like vitamin D and vitamin B12. And throughout
Hmm.
today, we'll talk supplementation as well, which I think is really important.
Yeah.
outside of making sure you have basic labs and say we've checked those boxes and everything looks great, then we go into a diet recall and we look at, let's assess kind of where you've been eating the past week.
Okay.
And that gives me an idea of where their macronutrient levels lie. So how much
Okay.
protein, hydrates, fats that they might be eating. And
Okay.
then I also look at the amount of color they're intaking. So everything that you're
Yeah.
feeling and that's happening in your
Yeah.
body it really is happening in the gut.
Sure.
And we start looking at food being medicine. The first thing we need to
Yeah.
start
Yeah.
is how colorful is the plate you're eating, and then what
Hmm.
position of the food you're eating. So the
Sure.
macronutrients. So that's really first and foremost is some
Yeah.
education around that.
Yeah. I think that's amazing, right? Some of those conversations I imagine are more eye-opening than others, and they're like, oh, my plate's pretty brown and yellow, and you're like, well, like
The
probably should
beige
add.
plate. I like to talk about the beige plate. Are you familiar?
Yeah, I remember you saying that. Yeah, the
There's
base
a lot of
plate.
healthy foods that are beige,
Yeah,
potatoes are beige, like eggs are
yeah,
kind of beige, but
yeah,
like, I think that there's also a lot more to it. And, in their defense, we see people, especially in your practice, you're seeing that your main clientele is the baby boomer era, right? Of that 1945 into the 60s and
yeah,
then above, of course, but they're really in the mindset, unless it's been changed throughout education, that certain foods that once were told to them being healthy,
yeah,
fat-free, sugar-free,
yeah,
things like that to help create health are the way to go. And it's really our job to make sure that we bridge that gap of education, let them know 'cause science is constantly evolving. And
yeah,
so we need to understand that that's not where they need to be focusing on right now to essentially help meet their goals. So fatigue is one of those main symptoms I hear from women, body composition being one of the main
yeah,
things I see.
yeah,
I see change without a significant change in their diet and exercise sometimes, right?
yeah,
So that's
totally.
the frustrating part is that women will come to me and they're saying, I'm still working out. I'm still
Yeah,
eating really well. But what ends up happening is they aren't making any significant changes based on the changes that have happened in their body. And that's really hard
mhm,
to create clarity. I have a patient
yeah,
right now that it's really, really challenging to meet goals based on the changes that they're going through
okay,
in their life and to to really clarify with them saying if we don't create change there's going to be no change being made
yeah,
but
yeah,
the problem is for them to really invest in what that change looks like and that's very individual based on the symptoms. So I think when it comes to fatigue and energy we make sure that from the foundational nutritional standpoint, we make sure that we clean their diet up in a way that is going to support energy levels. And
mhm.
one of the main things is how much protein are you eating?
Yeah, that's a big one right now. That's a big
And
one right now.
that's everywhere you look, everywhere you
Yeah,
read, it's going to be every
yeah,
influencer, every provider, every
yeah,
book. So not taking this to the extreme of it becoming a fad diet,
yeah,
right? And I
yeah,
think that's really important that make sure that we educate our patients that say, this is general nutrition. This is
yeah,
being
yeah,
healthy in for longevity, for
yeah,
muscle. So we're not looking at something like sarcopenia from age-related muscle loss, right? Like this is what we're trying to avoid,
yes,
frailty or
yeah,
failure to thrive,
yeah,
when you're 70, 80 years and beyond.
totally.
And you do that by making sure you're making proper changes in
Yeah,
your diet.
yeah. Yeah, I agree. And those are things that I hear people complaining about and what they're feeling. I think from a general like 15,000 foot view, when those people are in front of us, typically protein intake is one that it's like, hey, like this just needs a change. Like you are actually underdosing yourself when it comes to protein. You're not even hitting the standards. And so if you have that, 50-year-old and above in front of you, what do you tell them for your recommendations for protein? Not only how much, but quality.
Yeah. So, if you would have asked me this even 6 months ago, I would have given you this fancy number based on your ideal body weight, and it would have
Okay,
been
yeah.
a
Yeah.
beautiful thing, right? Because that's what everyone right now is telling
Yeah.
you, right?
Okay.
You should be eating 1 gram of protein per ideal body weight, right?
Sure.
And or 1.2 per, kilograms of body weight, however, whatever metric system that we're in. And
Yeah.
I really do think that can from a scientific standpoint, sure, it makes sense, right?
Sure,
Like
sure, sure, sure.
for layman's terms of when we're home and
Yeah,
somebody's listening and needing a little insight, because
yeah,
for me, I can look at a chicken breast and tell you that there's 32 grams of protein in a chicken breast,
yeah,
but that's because I do this
yeah,
for
yeah,
a living,
totally.
right?
Yeah,
So to expect somebody else that's not educated in that world to
yeah,
go out and just calculate their own needs is
yeah.
it's an unfair ask and setting them up not to be successful long term.
Mhm.
I've
But
really
sometimes, yeah, sometimes you get the analytical person though, and they're like, "I got to know these numbers." Like, I just how I work with engineers, and they're just like, "Hey, I've got to know this. Like, tell me because I."
I give numbers, but I
Yeah,
don't expect them to create the mathematical equation by
yeah,
finding
yeah,
their ideal body weight, because that is a process. Now, when I start saying from a woman coming in at 50 years old and they want to start increasing protein, because
yeah.
sometimes I'm doing a diet recall, I have plenty of women coming in and they're at, 50 or 60 grams a day. And that is much lower than what I need them to be at and what their body
Totally.
at.
Yeah,
So sometimes right out of the gate, I'm like, you need to be eating at least 20 to 25 grams of protein every meal. And right there, that's going to increase them up into,
yeah,
80 or 90 gram a day range
yeah.
without them having to do any calculations.
Love that.
It's just more attainable for their life and realistic to ask them to
Yeah,
make those changes. When
yeah.
it becomes too difficult, generally speaking, people are not going to do it. Right.
Mhm.
Especially when it comes to these big conversations like
Yeah,
nutrition. People have been eating a certain way. Some people have been eating a certain
yeah,
way
yeah,
for whole entire lives.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
it's instilled in
yeah,
them and not want to budge. Like food brings people joy.
yeah.
So it's different than saying, "Ooh, that outfit doesn't look great on you," or "That's not your color. You need to go change. Maybe this
Yeah,
is my
yeah,
color scheme." This is actually changing ways people grew up, the
yeah,
connections they have with food, memories they have.
yeah,
That's a really
yeah,
tough thing to ask people to do.
yeah,
So
yeah,
making it simple as possible is absolutely
yep.
necessary. And especially as people get older, they're more set in their ways too.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
we need to
yeah,
be
we all
math.
know this. Yeah.
We are. Like I am
Yeah,
so set in my ways.
yeah,
Every year I get more and more set in my ways. So
yeah,
I do think there's a lot of value in meeting people where they're at
yep,
and being realistic and
yeah.
with expectation to change.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's pretty digestible too on your first time meeting them. And you're like, hey, just like include a little bit more protein, 20 to 25 grams each meal. That's a great place to start. Don't worry about that lofty goal of 130 grams in your day. Like just chunk it up. And like that's where you need to be at, and then we have a discussion, at least I do with my clients of like, this is what sarcopenia is, and like this is the definition of it. And just like osteopenia and porosis, it's more of a silent disease. Like you don't feel it happening day to day, but then
Yeah.
like you have this sudden change. You're like, hey, 10 years ago I was doing this, but I'm unable to do that now. Like what changed? And it's like, these slow changes over time are the things that you and I are looking out for these people. And when it comes to movement, I do the exact same thing with them. Like, hey, like you got to chunk it up. Like, don't think of like when we talk about resistance training, like don't think that you need to be spending 45 to 50 minutes or 60 minutes in the gym. Like that's not where we start. That's not like how we incorporate it and make it a long-term change for you. So I think you're exactly right. Like meeting them where they're at, because convincing people to change their diet is equally as hard as, trying to convince somebody that they need a resistance train and they haven't their entire life, And so like,
Yeah.
it's just a challenging thing to do. We're human beings, like we resist change and things that are unknown. And so I think that's amazing to have that conversation. So if I heard you right, like incorporating that 20 to 25 grams per meal. Now they're going to ask you about supplementation or shakes. Like, tell us what your thoughts are on that.
Sure. And just before I bridge into supplementation, I want to be sure
Yeah.
when I'm talking about the protein piece is I also tell people like what a plate should look like. So
Okay.
if they're home and they're creating a meal and they're wanting body composition changes,
Yep.
right? And
Yep.
they
Yep.
see the impact that, maybe the scale doesn't go down, but their clothes are fitting better and they feel
Totally.
stronger and they have less joint pain and more energy. Like those are the
Mhm.
goals, really
Mhm.
trying to move people away from the number on the scale and more physical
Mhm.
feel is really my goal.
Okay.
And when they're looking at creating a plate, like 20 to 25 grams of protein, what does that look like? Well, it's a
Yeah.
quarter of your plate typically.
Okay.
And then we
Cool.
start saying the whole other half of your plate needs to be something of color. I don't care what it is, something of
Yeah.
color. And that could be an 80-20 rule. So 80% of the time, just try to be mindful that a quarter of your plate is protein and the rest of your plate has some color and nutrients. And then the other 20% of the time, you're going to live your life. There's going to be birthday parties,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
breakfast, like there's going to
Right.
be other things. But, trying to create that balance approach, but also visual for people to see, okay, when I look down at my plate, these are eggs and then this is fruit. Like that's
Yeah.
my breakfast.
Totally.
And I really try to educate people at the
Yeah.
same time, letting them know that yes, I'm telling you not to eat a ton of sugar because of X, Y.
Yeah.
Like I talk about what we lose in our food. This is where we bridge into supplementation, right?
Yeah. Okay.
So yes, we might be looking at protein and vegetables and fruit, but that nutrient density might be a little different than 50 years ago. So we start measuring our levels. So that's the B12, the D, the labs that I talked about at the beginning,
Mm,
is seeing where you're at to make sure that there's no deficiencies we need to be aware of. There's
yeah.
some tell true like supplements that I love, and I feel
Yeah.
like everyone walking around probably needs to be on them.
Okay.
And vitamin D is one of them.
Okay.
There are male or female, very few people I think should not be on vitamin D.
Okay.
And if you live in Florida or if you live in Antarctica, it more than likely you are not consuming through food the necessities that you need.
Okay.
So people say, well, I'm in the sun all the time. I hear this all the time. It's like, I'm
Yeah.
in the sun all the time. But you also need certain nutrients to convert that sun into the active vitamin D.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you don't have that already in your body, you can get
Okay.
all the sun you want,
Yeah.
right? You're not converting it to the active
Yeah.
form. So more than likely, you're going to need vitamin D for a multitude of reasons, for muscle synthesis, for immunity, for energy, for cognition. So a lot of times as we get older, especially women, I get the brain fog complaint. I cannot complete a thought. I'm so motivated.
Yeah.
So obviously diet's a huge piece, right? Like how
Yeah.
much are you relying on caffeine,
Yep.
how much you're relying on sugar, and we really deep dive into those questions, which can be tough and not always what they want to hear. We look at how they're balancing sugar when they
Yeah.
do eat, like in their lab work. But one of the supplements that we talk a lot about is vitamin D. And I would say 90% of my women in my practice that are tested that are not on vitamin D are deficient.
Wow. Wow. That
It's
makes
a pretty
sense.
big supplementation.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. So
um,
what's your recommendation for protein source? Like not necessarily like plant versus animal protein, but more of like what are your favorite ways to get more protein in?
mhm. So I am a whole food, like food forward
Okay.
person. So
Okay.
making sure that we do eat what we can with
Yeah.
lean proteins in food. But if we are supplementing, I'm
Yeah.
not like anti-protein powders
Okay.
or anything like that. I do really push my women to make sure that we know where that protein powder is coming from. And what I mean by that we are sourcing it from reputable places. If it's plant protein, then we're making sure that it is third party tested and metal tested and lead tested. I think that's really important
Okay.
because there's a lot of literature out there right now studying plant proteins and the high amounts of lead, mercury, and metals in plant
Wow.
protein.
I
So
didn't
making
know that.
sure that we're aware of where we're
Yeah. Yeah.
getting.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, like my pharmacy that I use, everything on my pharmacy is third party tested. So it's a really safe place for my patients
Okay.
to go in and just order what they need, whether it's a powder from a protein or a
Yeah.
vitamin D supplement.
Okay.
So
I'll put that link in here too.
yeah, awesome. Yeah, we'll touch that. But I do think that it's specific to your dietary abilities, if
Okay.
whether it's dairy or plant-based.
Yep.
If you can tolerate dairy, then absolutely whey isolate is the way to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
In my
Sure.
I think it's the cleanest and your body responds the best to it.
Mhm.
And you can get really reputable brands with
Yeah.
whey. But a lot of times as we age, we lose the ability to break lactose down. So we have an enzyme in our body called lactase. A lot of times that becomes less effective as we get
Mhm.
older.
Yeah.
Gut. And so a lot of times my women have some dairy sensitivities that are forcing them more into that plant
Yeah.
forward dairy choice.
Cool.
But
Very
they're
cool.
finding it's an easy way for them to get an extra 20 grams of protein in a day if they're struggling to not get above 60 or 65,
Yeah.
because right there, that helps them get close to the 80 or 85 range.
Yeah. Yes,
Mhm.
especially as appetite changes over time, like you get fuller quicker and easier. Like I've got a couple gals that are in their 80s, right? And they have a small meal and they're full. And I'm like,
Yeah.
whoa, like that's just not nearly enough. And so the protein supplementation through the shakes can be really helpful. And
Yeah.
that, it gives them a high amount of nutrients pretty quickly. And especially when I'm working with my women who, in that age group of 50s. And so when they're exercising a lot and they're using a lot of nutrients, but then they're not supplementing what they need to build muscle, there's a huge discrepancy there. Like, oh, I'm working my butt off, but I'm not having composition changes. But I'm like, well, you're also at 50 grams of protein a day. And so you're not even at your threshold. And so there's that discrepancy in knowledge, which I think is huge when it comes to you of like, hey, if we break this down to 25 per meal plus your protein shake, you're cresting over 100 grams and you're going to notice composition changes then. And so when I'm working with my clients and we're talking about resistance training, the timing of the protein, we have a little bit more forgiveness if you are intentional about your entire day. And so I like your approach there.
Yeah, and women that are active, your active women, really encouraging them within that 20 or 30 minutes post exercise to make sure they're getting, if it's a shake or their meal,
Mhm.
that's protein rich, and that's
Mhm.
that 20 to 30 grams of protein within that smaller women window. Men have a little bit larger of a window
Mhm.
to cater with as far as protein
Yep.
is concerned. I really like my women to be eating 20 to 30 minutes post, and then to have a
Mhm.
little protein on board before strength training as well.
Yeah.
Having a minimum of 15 grams of protein on board an hour
Mhm.
before a strength training session, and then consuming protein post as well
Yep.
is
Yep.
so vital to muscle growth
Love that.
and prevention of muscle loss,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
So, yes, you had mentioned as women specifically are getting older, their appetites and their hunger and fullness cues change.
Mhm.
And so the expectation for them to get 100 grams of protein in at the age of 80, that's not the goal for
Yeah.
them at
Yeah.
that stage, right? Like they don't need 100 grams of protein at 80 years old, right?
Mhm.
So the idea is to make sure that they are consuming the right amount of foods at the quantity and the portion size that they're able to eat.
Yep.
And if
Yep.
sometimes even when they hit that age of 70 or 80 and we start to see a big appetite decrease, sometimes and weight loss
Yeah.
and muscle
Yeah.
loss.
Yep.
So
100%.
there's
Yep.
certain symptoms that we need to pay attention to before saying
Mhm.
maybe they need an appetite stimulant,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
They need something along the lines to help them start consuming an extra 500 to 800 calories a day. We
Cool.
really
Yeah.
take in certain symptoms when we hit that age. And
Mhm.
is it weight loss? Is it appetite loss? Is it poor nutrition? Is it
Yeah.
dehydration?
Yeah.
These are all things that we need to take into consideration as they hit that certain age
Mhm.
where getting proper nutrition is challenging because they're just not eating enough.
Hmm. Yeah, totally. Yeah, and we've all, I mean, we've seen it, when we work with clients, and then we see it like in our old family members who are getting older, and like what happens is that you have a significant weight loss, and a lot of that is muscle. Like muscle is the organ of longevity. Like that is how we live longer and stronger. And so your tips to maintain that muscle mass over time through dialing in not only your labs, but to improve your protein distribution throughout your day, and then as you are resistance training, to supplement that resistance training with protein before and after, and just making sure that you're being intentional with that makes a huge difference, not only in how people feel, but kind of the goals that they're wanting to change, right? They want to have this composition changes. They want to feel better and stronger. And so those things are, when I tell my patients, like they're earned, like you've got to earn that. Like every bit of that is earned.
Yeah, I tell my patients, you can pick your hard. right?
Yeah,
It can be
yeah.
this,
There you go.
it can be this hard, right? It can be the change is hard, or your body
Yep.
lets you know when it's going to be really hard.
Yeah,
Uh,
totally.
I'd rather have the choice, right? I'd rather make the
Yeah.
choice
Yeah.
personally. I do think that, if you're making nutrition assessments for a woman that's 50 that had just gone through menopause, very different than a woman that's 80. But
Yeah.
that's an obvious statement for
Yeah.
us, right? Like,
Yep.
we're looking at making sure nutritionally that they have some body composition changes at 50,
Mhm.
like especially if it's changed in the point that they have gained fat mass and lost muscle mass, and
Mhm.
they physically don't feel well and they're fatigued, then we
Yeah.
really change
Yeah.
how they're eating and how they're training and
Yep.
their lifestyle. And maybe it's portion control too. That is a big piece of what we focus on. And then we make the necessary changes years as we get older of what we need for more of or less of.
Yeah.
Supplementation is key. The protein powder I think is helpful. The vitamin D, I think omega 3s are really important as far
Yeah.
as joint health, muscle health, cardiac health.
Okay.
And then also magnesium and B12 those
Okay.
are very important supplements as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's great. And I think people are going to want to, look into that more and get those labs and understand like, maybe these are some low hanging fruit things that I could change right away that could move the needle on some of this stuff. When it comes to movement, and tying this all with movement, like you've got your girl in front of you, you're female and you're like, hey, like you're a nutrition, you're starting to dial that in. Like, what do you tell them from a movement perspective too?
From a strength and
Yeah,
conditioning.
strength and movement. Yeah, I love to hear your opinion on it. Yeah.
Yeah, so one of the main things that, especially from women's physiology, that we need is
Mhm.
we need to get back to really prioritizing resistance training, but also impact work. So, what I mean by
Yeah,
that, I
very
was
good.
watching this woman at the gym the other day, and she might have been 70. I'm not
Yeah,
even sure. And she had the short plyometric box, and she was double jumping on
there
it.
we go.
So I
Yeah,
wanted to take a picture of her. I wanted to make a
yeah,
post, do it all, be like, this is what we all need to be
yeah.
doing.
Hmm.
And I'm a big proponent for any type of jumping movements, whether it's jumping in place for women that, trying to create balance and strength,
Yeah, there we go.
box jumps if you are able to do them. Uh,
Hmm.
but but big time resistance training, and I would think women should be doing it 3 or 4 times a week. And
Yeah,
it doesn't have to be these 45, 60-minute sessions,
yeah,
right? And it has to be heavy for you. So if heavy for you is a 5 or 10 pound dumbbell,
yeah, yeah.
right?
That's great.
And
Yeah,
walking and cardio, and we don't have to put ourselves in the box of a trendy workout. It can be very basic, it can be old
yeah,
school, it can
yeah.
be just trying to get back to the basics of building strength and making sure we're moving our body on
Mhm.
the daily. We should all be moving in some way every day.
100%. Yep. I agree. Yeah. I love that you say that because, 'cause from my perspective, I'm always curious what people hear on the other side of things when they're talking about, nutrition and fueling their body. And then you're like, hey, like this movement perspective is important as well. And I feel like in the same age group that we're talking about, like they didn't necessarily, for females to be in the gym when they were growing up as teenagers and 20-year-olds, like that wasn't happening. Like there was the stigma is just so different than it is today. And
So
so
different.
yeah, and when I've got that person in front of me and they're like, "Hey, I just worked with Rachel. Like, I'm increasing my protein intake. My plate's more colorful than ever. I'm feeling good about where things are going. I'm ready to go into the strength perspective." And it's just a breath of fresh air to hear that, like, hey, like, not only is strengthening important, but like, there's got to be some sort of impact through your body because a lot of times they're thinking about osteopenia and osteoporosis, and they're thinking about the spine changes over time. And like, those are your bones, like kind of dissolving a little bit. So becoming a little bit more brittle. And so we improve that through the impact work and resistance training. And you're exactly right. Like 5 pounds, maybe you're heavy right now, and then 10 pounds, maybe this person. But I think just like when you do the labs, like what I do with people is I get the initial strength testing. We look at the composition. We see how much poundage you can generate. Are you at risk for sarcopenia because your poundage of strength isn't as good as where the average poundage of strength should be for your age? And so we look at all of those things, including, do you want to go to the gym? Do you want to do this at your house? And there's so much flexibility there, but it could be overwhelming. And so I like how you do it of like, hey, you just got to start somewhere, make a little change, but then team up with the people around you to ensure that like at least you're doing, you're making a step in the right direction that doesn't seem overwhelming. You don't need to spend an hour in the gym, but you need to spend some time on the resistance training aspect because it is important. And when you do that, you're setting yourself up for your 70s and 80s and 90s to be better than ever and better than what you saw growing up. And so I think there's
I
just,
think the movement is changing. I feel like women are lifting a little bit more. I was in the gym the other
mm,
day and there's some lifting platforms and I was on one
yeah,
and then you look down and there were three other platforms and they were
yeah,
all women.
yeah,
And I
that's
was
great.
so impressed to see like that it's flooded with female
Yeah,
strength and power out there, which is really great.
yep,
I do think that a lot of this is new for the generation that we're
yep,
talking about here today, and it can
yeah,
be challenging and it can be scary. So making
yeah,
sure you're working with somebody that can really like deep dive into proper movements and make it safe and a very positive experience for you is important. So if it's
yeah,
working
yeah,
or working with a personal trainer that knows anatomy, it's really important that they know and understand the body.
yep,
And
yep,
making sure that if you have to hire out
yeah,
to get started, that's an investment in your health. And I
yeah.
feel like you will not regret
Mhm.
spending that money.
True. True. I
Yeah.
think, what I do love about working with women is that they are more likely to ask for help than men. So that is nice.
Yeah.
And so absolutely, yeah, I think those are great tips. So finishing up here, it sounds to me like, changing the protein intake, just adding a little bit more and diversifying that a little bit in your diet, as well as having a little bit more color on your plate, but then taking it the next step of like, hey, maybe you should get these labs done to kind of look at what your individual needs are. And that's where you come in, where it doesn't take a ton of time and effort, but just reviewing like what does your specific body need, and then at that same time start to think about your movement changes, how you're impacting your body, what resistance work are you doing or not doing, and what changes you want to make first. Does that sound about right? Like if you were working with
Okay, yeah,
somebody
spot
right?
on. Great.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, hey, like I know that you could talk about this forever, and trust me, I wish we could. And this is our second conversation having this, and I feel like I always learn something from you of, not only what you're telling your clients, but what the research is showing. Like we keep up on this stuff because we care about our patients and we want to see people age well and maintain this muscle mass for a long time and just feel better along the way. And it's just nice knowing that you are a great resource for those, especially for women, so they can lean on you to figure out what their body needs.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yeah, yeah. So they can get a hold of you. It's thrive2wellness.com, right? And on
Oh,
your website, you have your resources in which they can look at the supplementation, the store that I know you vet out to make sure they're getting good information. And so what is a good phone number? And then what's your Instagram handle?
yeah. So, I mean, we can put this in the show notes as well, but basically, my handle for Instagram is at Thrive to Wellness. So
Yeah,
very
yeah,
straightforward.
yeah,
And we can link the phone number and
yeah.
email in the show
Yep.
notes and they can contact me that way. And it's on my website as well.
Oh yeah, perfect then. Perfect. Okay. And then also worth noting that you are virtual, right? And
Yes.
so,
Yes, I
okay,
do telehealth
perfect. So this is very
anywhere,
familiar.
everywhere.
Awesome, awesome. Well, hey, I appreciate your time, and you're just such a wonderful resource. Keep killing it out there, and thank you for just treating
Yeah.
so many people so well.
Same to you. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel.